The bar smelled of stale beer, fried food, and cigarette smoke. Neon lights flickered over cracked vinyl booths, casting a pale glow on the mismatched patrons. Laughter erupted over the clinking of glasses, mingling with the low hum of a jukebox playing an old rock ballad. In the corner, away from the rowdy crowd, sat Lieutenant Commander Sarah Donovan. She nursed a glass of water, her posture relaxed but alert, scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing. In civilian clothes, she could have been mistaken for any other woman. Hair pulled back, leather jacket, jeans, calm demeanor. But Sarah wasn't just any woman. Those who knew the military world would have recognized the subtle marks of a SEAL, a faint trident tattoo on her forearm, the disciplined way she carried herself, the quiet confidence in her gaze. Even here, in the humdrum chaos of a local bar near San Diego, her presence commanded attention, whether anyone realized it or not. The bar was packed that Friday evening. Sailors on shore, leave mixed with locals, laughter, and coarse jokes filling the air. One group of men, loud and brash, leaned against the bar, tossing around half-hearted threats and exaggerated stories. They noticed her almost immediately. There was something about her calmness, the way she seemed to be in the room without belonging to it, that drew attention, and eventually the ire of the reckless. "Hey, pretty lady," one of them said, leaning back. "What are you doing sitting all alone?" Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She only looked up slowly, her expression neutral, almost bored. The man's grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. He waved a hand dismissively. "Relax," another added. "We're just joking." Before Sarah could respond, one of them, tall, burly, and clearly drunk, stumbled forward, shoved her lightly from behind, as though expecting her to react with laughter or complaint. The shove was meant to be humorous, a joke for his friends, but the effect was instantaneous. Sarah's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor with a loud crash. The room's laughter faltered. She turned slowly. Not quickly, not angrily, but with deliberate, controlled motion. Her eyes, calm yet sharp, swept over the men. For a moment, time seemed to still. The man who had shoved her laughed, expecting theatrics, an apology, maybe even tears. He was met instead with an icy, unwavering stare that seemed to pierce straight through him. No one moved. The jukebox hummed. The neon lights flickered over the tension that had suddenly descended like a shadow. Sarah's hand brushed against the sleeve of her jacket, just enough to reveal a faint tattoo, the trident, the emblem of the Navy SEALs. A symbol of discipline, danger, and deadly skill. It wasn't obvious, but to those who knew, it spoke volumes. "You shouldn't do that," she said softly, her voice calm, but carrying a weight that made the man pause. There was no aggression, no threat in her tone, just certainty. The man laughed nervously, trying to cover his discomfort. "Relax, lady. We were just messing around. Don't get your panties in a twist." Sarah's gaze didn't waver. She leaned back slightly, her posture controlled, her breathing even. She radiated a presence that was both calm and terrifying. There was something in the way she carried herself, years of training, of surviving situations most men couldn't even imagine. She had faced life-and-death scenarios hundreds of times, situations where hesitation could mean death. This shove, this mockery, was insignificant. Yet it demanded respect. The room held its breath. A few patrons exchanged glances, realizing something they couldn't quite articulate. This was no ordinary woman. Her presence carried the weight of experience and authority that demanded attention, even in the chaos of a crowded bar. As the man opened his mouth to respond, Sarah's mind briefly flashed back, a habit she couldn't shake, to years of grueling training, sleepless nights, and missions that left men trembling. She remembered the early mornings in Coronado, The freezing surf, the brutal physical trials that had broken weaker recruits. She remembered the screams, the exhaustion, the moments when quitting felt like the only option. And she remembered pushing forward anyway. That steel, forged through relentless discipline, now rested quietly in her body, invisible to the untrained eye. The man's laughter died. He noticed the faint tattoo peeking from under her sleeve. "Hey, what's that?" he asked, pointing. "Trident," she replied simply, almost dismissively. "Navy SEAL. Maybe read up sometime." Her words were casual, but the subtext was unmistakable. For a second, the man's bravado faltered. His friends nudged him nervously. The weight of the room shifted. The joke had ended. The shove, intended to provoke laughter, had instead revealed the presence of someone trained to handle threats with precision and control. Sarah didn't move closer. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood, straightening her jacket, letting the silence speak for her. The men shifted uneasily, sensing that they had crossed an invisible line. The energy in the room changed. Fear mingled with curiosity, awe, and a sudden respect. In that brief moment, Sarah's calm mastery left an impression on everyone watching. It wasn't the trident alone that mattered. It was the confidence, the unshakable control, the way she carried the weight of her training like an invisible armor. People who had spent their lives thinking they understood strength suddenly realized there was a depth they had never imagined. As she walked to the bar to retrieve a new drink, the jukebox continued its hum, but the air remained charged. Conversations quieted, eyes followed her. Some whispered, "Did you see her eyes?" Others, "Who is she?" She ordered water, paid silently, and turned to leave. But in that moment, the lesson had been delivered. Some things could not be ignored. Some presences could not be challenged lightly. The world might see just a woman, sitting quietly in a corner of a bar, but she carried the weight of battles fought, lives saved, and training endured beyond imagination. And anyone who ever thought of attacking from behind would learn eventually why you never, ever do it to a Navy SEAL. Sarah Donovan wasn't born a legend. She was born in a small town in Ohio, where the winters were harsh and the summers were long, dusty, and unrelenting. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, ran a small auto repair shop, the kind with grease-stained floors and the smell of motor oil that clung to everything. He was a stern man, a man of discipline and quiet principles, who believed strength wasn't measured by muscle alone, but by resilience, courage, and the ability to stand when the world tried to push you down. From a young age, Sarah learned to lift, run, and endure. She watched her father work on engines with the patience of a monk and the precision of a surgeon. She learned to measure twice, cut once, and always anticipate problems before they happened. But it wasn't just machines her father taught her to master. He taught her life. He taught her to shoot, to respect firearms, and to trust instincts that most people ignored. "Always be aware of what's behind you," he would say, a half-joke, half-warning, as he guided her through early rifle practice in the backyard. Those lessons, though seemingly ordinary at the time, would become the foundation of the woman she would later become. High school was another battlefield. Sarah was one of the few girls who never worried about appearances. While other girls were preoccupied with social hierarchies, she was lifting weights, running trails, and learning the value of persistence. Boys teased her, teachers underestimated her, and classmates laughed at her determination. But she didn't care. Each challenge, each sneer, and each failure strengthened her resolve. By the time she graduated, she knew one thing: the world underestimated her at its own peril. When she turned 18, she made a decision that shocked everyone in her town. She enlisted in the Navy. Some thought she was seeking adventure. Others assumed she wouldn't last a month. Sarah, however, was quietly confident. She had trained herself to endure hardship, to face fear head-on, and to survive situations that would break most people. The Navy became her new battleground. Her first day at the recruitment center was intimidating. Rows of men stared her down, questioning her choice, questioning her ability. "SEAL training isn't for women," one instructor sneered. Sarah didn't respond. She had learned long ago that words were cheap. Only results mattered. Her mind focused, she signed the paperwork, understanding that she was stepping into a world where failure could be permanent. A grueling path toward BUD-S, basic underwater demolition SEAL training, began. From the first day, it was clear that the Navy demanded everything. They stripped recruits down to nothing, testing them physically, mentally, and emotionally. Hypothermia, sleep deprivation, endless runs on sand that burned like fire. Every step was a test. Sarah found herself constantly on the edge, muscles screaming, lungs burning, body trembling with exhaustion. But every time she fell, she got back up. She remembered her father's words, "Pain is temporary. Strength is forever." Instructors tried to push her beyond her limits. Some doubted her simply because she was a woman. Others admired her perseverance secretly. Cold surf at dawn became her proving ground. She swam through waves taller than herself, lungs threatening to collapse with every stroke. She carried logs heavier than most recruits her size, running laps through the sand, mud, and freezing water. Each test was designed to break her, but each test also forged her stronger. One night during Hell Week, a particularly brutal stretch of training that tested endurance, teamwork, and willpower, Sarah lay on the sand, shivering uncontrollably. Her body ached in every joint, her fingers and toes numb. Every instinct screamed to quit, to give in, to surrender to the cold and exhaustion. But she remembered her father's voice, the lessons of Ohio, the vision of herself earning that trident. She forced herself up, moved forward, step by agonizing step, her mind overriding the screams of her body. Every push forward was a victory, every drop of sweat a promise fulfilled. Weeks turned into months, and the men who had initially doubted her began to notice something extraordinary. Sarah wasn't just surviving, she was excelling. Her precision in navigation, her calm under pressure, and her ability to anticipate problems before they happened made her invaluable. She became a quiet leader, the one people could rely on when the storm of training reached its peak. By the final phase of training, only the most relentless remained. Sarah had faced freezing surf, 20-mile runs in packs, long nights without sleep, and instructors pushing psychological limits. When the moment came, she earned her Navy SEAL trident, a symbol of mastery, sacrifice, and lethal skill. The ceremony was quiet. She received the insignia not with boastful pride, but with steady grace. Her eyes, however, glimmered with the knowledge that she had passed a crucible that few could survive. She had transformed from the mechanic's daughter in Ohio into someone capable of commanding life-and-death situations with calm and precision. Even after graduation, Sarah knew her journey had only begun. She had the skill, the discipline, and the body of a warrior. But the true tests lay ahead, missions that would demand everything she had learned and more. She carried her trident like a secret promise to herself. The world would not define her limits. She would define them. Years later, when someone shoved her in a crowded bar, she would not flinch, scream, or strike. That shove was insignificant compared to the waves, the freezing nights, and the pain she had endured to earn the right to be there. And yet, in that small gesture, in that single moment, she carried decades of training, experience, and resilience. The quiet power that radiated from her wasn't just skill. It was history, pain, triumph, and relentless dedication embodied in human form. Sarah Donovan had been forged in fire, water, and exhaustion. Every shove, every insult, every challenge had been met with calm, precision, and an unyielding will. And now, even as she sat quietly in the corner of that bar, she was ready. Ready for the world to learn, as it often did too late, why you never, ever attack a Navy SEAL from behind. The sun had barely risen over the jagged mountains of Kandahar when Lieutenant Commander Sarah Donovan and her team prepared for their first major deployment. The desert was a harsh teacher. Unrelenting sun, sand that burned through boots, and a wind that carried whispers of danger. Every mission felt like a chess match, with life and death as the stakes. For Sarah, this was more than a deployment. It was the first time her training, her discipline, and her resilience would be tested in real combat. Her team moved with precise synchronization, each member reading the other's intentions without words. Sarah's eyes scanned constantly, rooftops, alleys, shadows. Every instinct honed in training flared into action. The convoy had been tasked with delivering humanitarian aid to a remote village suspected of harboring insurgent activity. Simple enough in theory. In practice, every corner could conceal death. As the Humvees rolled across the dry, cracked earth, Sarah's mind calculated distances, estimated bullet trajectories, and noted potential ambush points. She knew the enemy wasn't visible yet, but she could feel them. The way the wind shifted, the sudden silence among birds, the tiny disturbances in sand that betrayed movement. The ambush came without warning. A hail of gunfire erupted from rooftops and side alleys. Metal screeched, bullets pinged against armor, and chaos erupted in seconds. Her training took over instantly. She ducked low, scanning for targets, signaling her team with a series of subtle gestures that conveyed urgency without words. One of her teammates was pinned behind a Humvee, exposed to enemy fire. Without hesitation, Sarah sprinted across the open ground, bullets whipping past her. She reached him, dragging him to cover, her own body absorbing sand and shrapnel. Every muscle in her body screamed, but years of preparation and discipline transformed fear into precision. Her movements were calm, calculated, lethal. The firefight escalated. Sarah directed suppressive fire, her voice calm but commanding. Left flank, cover me. Reload and shift fire. She moved fluidly, never pausing, always calculating. Every decision was measured. Every motion had purpose. Her team followed instinctively, trusting her judgment even under the most extreme pressure. At one point, a stray rocket-propelled grenade slammed into a nearby wall, showering dust and debris. The sound was deafening. One of the new recruits froze, eyes wide in terror. Sarah grabbed him, pulling him down, whispering, "Breathe. Focus. You've got this." Her voice cut through the chaos like a lifeline, grounding him in the moment. The firefight lasted minutes that felt like hours. Sarah's body burned, her lungs screamed for air, her mind raced at impossible speed. Yet her control never wavered. She was aware of every movement, enemy positions, her teammates' locations, potential escape routes. Every instinct honed in the brutal training of Coronado and beyond now mattered. In the midst of the battle, she spotted a sniper attempting to flank the team from a rooftop. Without hesitation, she moved, low and swift, drawing a bead and neutralizing the threat with a single shot. No hesitation, no panic. Precision under fire was her signature. By the time reinforcements arrived, the enemy had retreated, leaving behind chaos but no more casualties. Sarah's team, though shaken, was intact. She checked every member, offering nods, words of reassurance, and silent acknowledgement of the courage they had shown. That night, under a cold desert sky, the team huddled around a small fire. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by exhaustion and reflection. Sarah sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the stars above, listening to the desert wind. The battle had been won, but the cost, mental, emotional and physical, was already settling in. She thought of the families of her team, the innocents endangered, and the harsh reality of the world she had chosen. For Sarah, every mission carried a lesson. This first encounter wasn't just about survival. It was about leadership, responsibility, and the burden of decision-making in life or death situations. Every choice could save or destroy. Every hesitation could be fatal. Her leadership style became evident that day. She didn't command with anger or fear. She led with calm authority. She inspired trust, not through intimidation, but through competence. Her team knew that under her guidance, every move was calculated, every risk assessed, every life valued. The mission also reinforced something personal. Sarah realized that the desert, the war, and the endless danger were no longer adversaries. They were mirrors. They reflected her own strength, her resilience, and her capacity to endure what most could not. She wasn't invincible, but she was prepared. She wasn't reckless, but she was decisive. And she wasn't alone. The brotherhood she had earned, the respect of her team, was a bond forged in fire and trust. Returning to base, she filed the mission report with precise detail, noting every tactical choice, every encounter, every action that saved a life or neutralized a threat. Her superiors recognized the value she brought, not just her skill, but her judgment, her calm, and her ability to lead under pressure. Even those who had doubted her because of her gender began to see her for what she truly was, a warrior without equal. But the battlefield left its mark. That night, alone in her tent, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The adrenaline faded, leaving fatigue and memory. Faces of the injured, the sound of gunfire, the heat of the desert sun, all replayed in her mind. She knew the desert would call again. There would be more missions, more ambushes, more moments where her decisions could determine life or death. And she would be ready. The desert had taught her one thing above all: precision, calm, and preparation were the difference between survival and failure. Every mission would test her body, mind, and spirit, but the training, the pain, and the relentless pursuit of mastery had prepared her to meet any challenge. As dawn broke over the mountains once more, Sarah looked out across the desert, the wind carrying grit and dust into her face. She tightened the strap of her gear, checked her team, and prepared for the next operation. The desert was unforgiving, the enemy relentless, but she was neither afraid nor hesitant. She had been forged in water, ice, and sand. She had faced hell in training and emerged stronger. And now, in the fire of combat, she had proven her worth. For Lieutenant Commander Sarah Donovan, the desert wasn't just a battlefield. It was the proving ground of a warrior, the stage on which courage, skill, and leadership became legend. Every mission honed her, every challenge refined her, and every life she protected added to the story of a woman who could not be underestimated, ignored, or pushed aside. And somewhere, far beyond the desert, civilians would later witness her quiet dominance, the calm, precise, lethal grace that made it clear: never, ever attack a Navy SEAL from behind. Nightfall in the desert brought with it an eerie stillness, broken only by the soft whisper of sand shifting across the dunes. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Donovan crouched behind a crumbling wall, her breathing steady, her eyes scanning the shadowed compound ahead. This was not a simple patrol. It was a ghost mission, a high-risk extraction deep in hostile territory. Every detail had been planned meticulously, yet even perfect planning could unravel in an instant. Her team of SEALs moved with silent coordination, communicating with hand signals and subtle gestures. Night vision goggles painted the world in shades of green, revealing every movement, every shadow, every potential threat. Sarah led the formation with calm authority, her mind anticipating every possible scenario: ambushes, sniper fire, booby traps. Years of training had honed her instincts to razor-sharp precision. The mission was simple in its objective, but fraught with danger. Extract a high-value intelligence source from a compound suspected of harboring insurgents. Intelligence was clear, but incomplete. Enemy presence was heavier than predicted, and escape routes were limited. One misstep could trigger a firefight that would turn the night into a tomb. Sarah signaled her team to split into 2 units. One would secure the perimeter, the other would breach the main entrance. She took point for the breach team, moving silently over loose sand and rubble. Her mind compartmentalized fear, adrenaline, and calculation into a single channel of focus. Every heartbeat was measured, every breath synchronized with her steps. They reached the outer wall of the compound. Sarah knelt, checking her night vision goggles and surveying the surroundings. 2 guards patrolled under a flickering floodlight. A wrong movement could alert the entire compound. She whispered the plan to her team, assigning precise roles. Then, in unison, they struck, silent, lethal, precise. The first guard went down with a chokehold, body hitting the sand with a muted thud. The second was immobilized with calculated force, his rifle falling harmlessly to the ground. Not a shot had been fired. Sarah's team moved like shadows, phantoms in the night. Every motion, every step, carried the weight of training and the promise of survival. Inside the compound, the tension escalated. The target was located on the 2nd floor, behind reinforced doors. Sarah signaled her point man to breach. Explosives were applied sparingly, precisely, to minimize noise and structural damage. The door gave way silently, and they entered. The intelligence source, terrified but unharmed, was quickly secured. But the mission was far from over. On the way out, a sudden noise, a loose floorboard, a startled animal, triggered the enemy alert. Flashlights swept across the compound. Voices shouted orders. The extraction route was now compromised. Sarah's mind raced, calculating alternatives in seconds. Alternate exit, southeast corner, move. She commanded, her voice calm yet firm. Her team responded immediately, adjusting formations and moving with practiced precision. Bullets began to whiz past, but Sarah remained composed, guiding her team with the silent authority that only experience could command. They reached the southeast wall. A rope line hung from a nearby ledge, previously identified during reconnaissance. Sarah clipped the target to the harness first, then checked her team. They descended, one by one, the ropes creaking under tension but holding firm. Every step required balance, control, and awareness. A single slip could be fatal. Once on the ground, they moved toward the extraction point, a waiting helicopter masked by darkness. Enemy searchlights swept the dunes, but Sarah's careful timing and terrain awareness allowed them to remain unseen. As the chopper touched down, blades kicking up sand and dust, she gave final confirmation to the pilot. The extraction was tense. Sarah secured the intelligence source inside, then climbed aboard herself, covering her team's exit. As the helicopter lifted off, she scanned the compound one last time, noting positions, enemy movements, and potential intelligence opportunities. The mission had been executed flawlessly, a ghost strike, leaving no trace except the message that the SEALs had been there. Back at base, debriefing was quick. Her superiors praised the execution, but emphasized the intelligence gained. Sarah listened, recording every detail mentally, noting what went well and what could be improved. Success was measured not just by survival, but by efficiency, precision, and the value of the operation. Yet the Ghost mission left its mark. It reminded Sarah that even the most controlled environment could turn deadly in seconds. That fear, adrenaline, and chaos were constant companions, whether in the desert or elsewhere. The skills she had mastered, anticipation, precision, calm under pressure, were now inseparable from her identity. In the quiet aftermath, Sarah trained again. Hours of physical conditioning, simulations, and mental rehearsal ensured that the instincts from that night would remain sharp. Her team, seasoned veterans themselves, recognized her leadership as decisive and measured. The Ghost mission was proof. Strategy, discipline, and trust were the trinity of survival. And though the desert receded into memory, the lessons stayed. Every mission, every challenge, and every moment of decision reinforced a single principle. Preparedness and calm are the most lethal weapons of all. Sarah Donovan had lived it, breathed it, and now carried it with her into every confrontation, whether in war zones or in civilian life. Returning home from her deployment was supposed to feel like relief. Instead, it felt like stepping into a world that had no map for her. The quiet streets of San Diego, the casual chatter of coffee shops, and the mundane rhythm of everyday life struck her as alien. After months of adrenaline, life or death decisions, and constant vigilance, the ordinary world seemed absurdly loud and yet eerily silent. Sarah Donovan, the woman who had faced ambushes in the desert and bullets whistling past her ears, now struggled with something far more subtle: peace. She tried to rejoin civilian life as though she could fold herself neatly back into it. She moved into a modest apartment near the coast, taking long walks along the beach to clear her mind. The ocean, which had once been her ally in grueling training, now felt familiar yet haunting. Waves crashed against rocks, steady and predictable, but they carried memories of missions past, the screams, the sand, the gunfire. Every gust of wind whispered fragments of commands, cries for help, and the silence of comrades lost. Sleep was elusive. Nights were filled with vivid dreams, not nightmares exactly, but replayed missions with alternate outcomes where she failed. She would wake gasping, heart pounding, and sometimes reach for a gun that wasn't there. The world of order, control, and predictability she had mastered as a SEAL clashed violently with the chaos of civilian life. Simple interactions, a honking car, a sudden shout, a stranger brushing past her, triggered reflexive responses she could not immediately suppress. She found solace in one place, the Veterans Rehabilitation Center. There, surrounded by men and women who carried their own invisible wounds, Sarah felt a connection she had been craving. She began volunteering, teaching classes in survival skills, self-defense, and mental resilience. She wasn't a counselor by trade, but her experience, raw, unvarnished, and battle-tested, gave her insight. She could see fear before it showed, hesitation before it became paralysis. Her presence was calming yet commanding, a paradox she had mastered over years of extreme discipline. Her students were a mix of war-weary veterans, young recruits struggling with civilian life, and some who had been broken physically or mentally by the demands of service. Sarah taught them not only to defend themselves, but to understand their own limits, to anticipate danger, and to find strength when everything seemed lost. She shared stories sparingly, choosing lessons over glory, emphasizing resilience rather than tales of heroics. She knew the danger of ego. True strength, she often reminded her students, was silent, precise, and disciplined. It was during one of these evenings, after a particularly successful self-defense class, that she decided to celebrate a milestone. One of her students had overcome a crippling fear of firearms and passed a significant marksmanship test. She went to a nearby bar, intending to toast quietly with a small group of friends and fellow volunteers. It was meant to be a brief escape, a place to feel like anyone else. The bar, however, was chaos incarnate. Neon lights flickered, music thumped too loudly, and the smell of grease and alcohol mixed into a pungent haze. Groups of men laughed, shouted, and challenged each other over trivialities. Sarah found a quiet corner, sipping water and observing the room with habitual alertness. She had learned that being a SEAL didn't end with leaving the battlefield. Vigilance was a permanent skill. Then came the shove. A tall man, drunk and careless, collided with her from behind. It was a thoughtless gesture, meant as a joke among friends, but to Sarah, it was a test she did not ask for. Her body reacted instinctively. Her hands didn't flinch, but her awareness flared. Time seemed to compress. She felt the weight of training, experience, and instinct converge in an instant. She turned slowly, deliberately, and the man's grin froze. The bar went quiet around them, though no one immediately realized why. A faint glimpse of her trident tattoo peeked from under her sleeve, a subtle signal to those who understood. Her calm gaze held a warning sharper than any weapon. The man tried to laugh it off. "Hey, relax, lady. We're just having fun." But the air had shifted. What had been chaos became stillness, tension. Her mind raced. Years of battlefield experience taught her to assess threats instantly. The man's posture, his friends' positions, potential exits, all of it calculated in milliseconds. This wasn't a combat mission, but the principles were the same. Control, precision, anticipation. She did not attack. She did not raise her voice. She simply shifted her weight, subtly asserting dominance without aggression. The difference between her and them was stark. They acted on impulse. She acted on calculation. By the time the group realized who they were confronting, it was too late. The quiet authority Sarah radiated was enough to disarm the situation before it escalated. The man stumbled back slightly, uncertainty replacing arrogance. His friends glanced around nervously, sensing something they couldn't name. A presence, a discipline, a lethal grace. For Sarah, it was all routine. Calm, controlled, precise. After the incident, she returned to her table. Her students, who had followed her discreetly, offered silent acknowledgement. They understood, even if no one else in the bar did, that what had just transpired was not mere luck or intimidation. It was skill, experience, and instinct honed over years of extraordinary training. Sarah sipped her water, serene, letting the tension settle like dust. Later, she reflected on the moment. The shove, though minor, was symbolic. It was the intrusion of chaos into a world that often seemed too normal for someone like her. Civilian life was not a battlefield in the traditional sense, but it presented challenges equally complex: social dynamics, misunderstandings, and threats to personal space. She understood, with deep clarity, that her true battle now was adaptation, finding equilibrium between the vigilance, ingrained in her by the Navy, and the calm needed to exist in the civilian world. Yet she also knew that her presence, even quietly, could protect. Every person she taught at the Veterans Center carried a fraction of her knowledge, her discipline. Every life she touched was a ripple, spreading strength, awareness, and resilience. In this new theater of life, she could still make a difference, still apply the lessons of her past. Sarah Donovan had faced fire, desert, and death. She had led under fire and saved lives in conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. And now, in the relative calm of civilian life, she was learning a different kind of strength, patience, subtlety, and the quiet power of presence. The shove in the bar was trivial in comparison to a firefight in Kandahar, yet it reminded her of one constant truth: vigilance never ends, and skill, when honed and controlled, is its own message. As the night drew to a close, she left the bar quietly, walking along the deserted streets toward the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore in a rhythmic, eternal pulse. In the sound of the surf, she found comfort and continuity. The battlefield had changed. The enemy was different, but the discipline remained. She had survived the desert, the heat, and the bullets. She would survive this world too, with the same precision, the same calm, and the same quiet force that had always defined her. The bar was alive with noise, laughter, clinking glasses, and the low buzz of conversations that never seemed to pause. Sarah Donovan sat in her usual quiet corner, sipping her water, her eyes scanning the room as she had instinctively trained herself to do. She was there to celebrate a small victory with her students from the Veterans Center, but even amid the cheer, her attention never wavered. Every movement, every shift in tone, every glance across the room registered in her mind with clarity honed by years of life or death training. It didn't take long before trouble found her. The same group of men who had previously shoved her lingered near the bar, their laughter loud and boisterous. This time, their arrogance was fueled by ignorance. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They only saw a woman sitting quietly, alone, seemingly harmless. One of them leaned over her table, bumping into her shoulder this time intentionally. "You got a problem with us, lady?" He sneered, his tone a mix of challenge and amusement. The other two laughed, emboldened by his aggression. They assumed fear would follow. But Sarah's reaction was not fear. It was calculation. Every second mattered. Her breathing remained steady, her muscles relaxed yet ready. She had faced ambushes in the desert, sniper fire in hostile territories, and situations where hesitation could mean death. This was simpler in comparison, but she treated it with the same precision. She stood slowly, her height commanding, her eyes scanning every possible angle. "Back off," she said softly, the words carrying more weight than any shout could. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning laced with experience. The room seemed to slow as her presence drew attention. Patrons nearby sensed the tension shift, though few could understand why. The first man, drunk and cocky, reached for her arm in a mocking gesture. That was the mistake. With the same precision she used on the battlefield, Sarah stepped aside, twisted his wrist, and applied just enough leverage to unbalance him. The man stumbled, his friends reacting instinctively, lunging forward to help him. In a fraction of a second, Sarah's movements became fluid, deliberate, and precise. She used the energy of their attacks against them, redirecting it rather than relying on brute force. The first man hit the floor with a thud. The second lunged, and she pivoted, guiding him off balance, planting him down safely, but unmistakably under control. The third rushed from behind, thinking he could flank her. She anticipated the movement before it happened, stepping into his path, applying a controlled push that sent him sprawling without a single strike. The bar went completely silent. Drinks teetered on the edge of tables. Patrons froze mid-motion. No one had seen violence so controlled, so clean, so unnervingly calm. Sarah didn't shout. She didn't display anger. She simply existed as a force that could not be ignored, a human embodiment of discipline and lethal expertise. One of the men tried to recover, rolling to his feet, eyes wide with panic and disbelief. Sarah's gaze caught his movement. She didn't move immediately, allowing a heartbeat to pass, giving him the chance to leave. A lesson in restraint, a test of whether he had learned anything. The lesson, however, was not learned yet. Another patron whispered, "Who? Who is she?" The bartender shook his head, silent, eyes wide. Everyone present felt the invisible weight in the room, a presence honed by extreme experience and refined through survival. They didn't yet know her history, but instinctively, they understood the consequences of misjudging it. The men finally scrambled, muttering curses and embarrassment, realizing that they had underestimated someone they should never have tested. Sarah remained calm, steadying her breath, her body returning to a neutral stance. She retrieved her water from the table and took a sip, as if nothing had happened, but the memory of her precision lingered in the room like an unspoken warning. Later, outside the bar, the men replayed the incident in disbelief. One of them muttered, "She didn't even hit us." And we're on the ground? A local veteran, standing nearby, smiled quietly and leaned over to whisper, "That's Lieutenant Commander Sarah Donovan, Navy SEAL." The words hit the group like a lightning bolt. Embarrassment turned to awe, and finally, to fear. They had no idea the force they had challenged, nor the training and experience that underpinned every subtle movement she had made that night. For Sarah, the confrontation was neither heroic nor violent. It was an application of the discipline and instinct that had carried her through Hell Week, desert firefights, and countless high-stakes missions. She didn't need to strike to assert control. The very presence, the precision, and the confidence were enough to neutralize the threat. It was a lesson in power, a lesson that only someone trained to understand force, timing, and human behavior could teach. After the incident, she returned to her table, sitting calmly as if she had merely adjusted her chair. Her students, who had watched quietly from a distance, nodded imperceptibly. They understood the depth of what had just occurred. They saw that control wasn't about brute force. It was about mastery of oneself and the environment. The lesson was subtle, but indelible. The rest of the night passed without incident. Sarah escorted her students home later, ensuring they were safe and sound, reflecting silently on the confrontation. She had demonstrated restraint and precision, the hallmarks of her training. The bar incident, trivial to most, was a testament to decades of experience, skill, and discipline. Alone later, she considered the event with a mixture of bemusement and reflection. In her military career, she had faced death and chaos daily. Here, it had been a trivial shove and a foolish challenge. Yet in both cases, the principles were the same: awareness, precision, control, and the understanding that every action has consequences. The difference was only in scale. Sarah Donovan walked away from the bar that night with the quiet satisfaction of one who had acted correctly. No one had been seriously hurt, but the lesson had been delivered. Never underestimate someone who has endured the unthinkable, trained relentlessly, and emerged as a master of skill and composure. To attack from behind, or to act without thought, was to challenge forces far beyond ordinary comprehension. The bar remained in the background of her mind, a small stage for a demonstration of lethal calm. But the larger world, the one where her true battles had been fought, still called. Afghanistan, Eastern Europe, deserts and forests alike, these had shaped her, and every act of measured precision reinforced the lessons learned there. For Sarah, this confrontation wasn't a moment of triumph, nor a story to tell. It was a continuation of a life defined by control, discipline, and the unyielding principle that skill, when applied with wisdom, speaks louder than any shout. The world may underestimate, mock, or challenge, but Azziel's presence alone communicates the consequences of misjudgment. And anyone who tried to attack from behind would learn that lesson, sooner or later, at their own peril. The morning after the bar incident was quiet, almost eerily so. The sun rose over San Diego, painting the streets gold and orange, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. Sarah Donovan woke early, as she always did, her body still moving with the rhythm of decades of discipline. Even in civilian life, the echoes of military routines remained ingrained. Early mornings, measured movements, mental focus. She brewed a cup of coffee, sitting at her small kitchen table, reflecting on the events and their inevitable consequences. The three men from the bar had scattered after their humiliating encounter, nursing bruised egos rather than bodies. In a world less attuned to danger, most would have forgotten the incident entirely, chalking it up to a moment of luck or coincidence. But in reality, they were already beginning to understand a lesson far deeper than embarrassment. Someone they had dismissed as just a woman had displayed the calm, precision, and control of a seasoned warrior. And now, in their subconscious, the lesson had taken root. One of the men, the one who had initially shoved her, could not escape the memory. He replayed the moment constantly. Her gaze, the subtle reveal of the trident tattoo, the fluid motions that had left them sprawled on the floor without a single hit. The realization of what they had faced gnawed at him. This was not luck. This was training, skill, and lethal discipline compressed into motion. He had brushed against the wrong person, and for once, his ignorance had nearly cost him respect, dignity, and perhaps more. By mid-morning, the man took a step he would never forget. He returned to the bar, cautiously, his friends reluctantly in tow. Their faces were pale, their posture cautious. They approached the bartender first, seeking confirmation of what they suspected. Who was that woman? One asked, voice barely above a whisper. The bartender, a man who had seen countless fights, but never a confrontation like this, simply shook his head. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Donovan, Navy SEAL. You might want to apologize. The words hit them like a lightning bolt. Navy SEAL, not a term thrown casually, but a badge of elite training, lethal skill, and a reputation forged in the crucible of battlefields, far from the comforts of civilian life. The men were stunned. Their bravado evaporated, replaced by fear and awe. They had assumed confrontation would be trivial. Now they understood the magnitude of their misjudgment. When they finally found Sarah at the Veterans Center later that day, the situation was tense. She was teaching a class in tactical awareness, guiding a group of students through controlled drills. Her students recognized the significance of her presence, someone who had survived extraordinary danger, and instinctively kept distance, understanding that what was about to unfold could be more educational than any formal lesson. The men approached, hands raised, voices nervous and shaking. We're sorry, the tallest one said, looking at the ground. We didn't know. We didn't understand who you were. Sarah studied them silently. Her posture was calm, her face impassive, but her eyes were sharp. She understood human behavior better than most. The fear, the guilt, the embarrassment, and she knew the impact of her response would teach far more than any punishment. Respect isn't given, she said slowly, her voice carrying the weight of years in the field. It's learned. You misjudged me, and you challenged forces you didn't understand. That was your first mistake. Hopefully, it's your last. Her words were not anger, not condescension, but precise, deliberate, and weighted with authority. They sank into the men like stones in a pond, creating ripples of realization that would spread far beyond the moment. The men nodded vigorously, swallowing their pride. The tallest one managed a weak, "We understand, ma'am." They left, the center quietly, humbled and awed, carrying with them the memory of a single lesson that would endure far longer than any barroom fight: the consequences of underestimating someone forged through the extremes of training and combat. Meanwhile, Sarah returned to her students. She used the moment as an impromptu teaching session, focusing not on physical confrontation, but on discipline, awareness, and presence. She explained, true strength isn't about aggression. It's about control, anticipation, and knowing when to act. Sometimes the smallest action, or even inaction, communicates more than any strike. Her students listened intently, absorbing not just her words, but her demeanor. Every gesture, every pause, every choice of phrase reinforced her lesson. She wasn't teaching how to fight. She was teaching how to exist with presence, how to project authority without aggression, and how skill and awareness could prevent conflict before it even began. Later, as she walked along the quiet streets near the center, Sarah reflected on the incident. She didn't relish the confrontation. It was neither heroic nor enjoyable, but it had served a purpose. It reinforced a principle she had lived by her entire life. Preparation, discipline, and awareness were the greatest defenses a person could cultivate. Violence was a tool, not a weapon for ego. Control was the real measure of power. Her reflection was interrupted by the memory of the men's faces, faces that now carried humility and fear, but also the first stirrings of understanding. She knew they would share the story, exaggerate it even, but the core truth would remain. You never attack a Navy SEAL from behind. You never underestimate experience, discipline, or presence. Sarah Donovan had taught lessons in battlefields, deserts, and frozen forests, saving lives and commanding respect under fire. Now, she had demonstrated the same principles in a civilian context, proving that the essence of a warrior was not confined to combat. It was patience, restraint, awareness, and precise action, whether the threat came from a battlefield or a barroom. By evening, the incident had passed into legend among those who had witnessed it. Patrons of the bar whispered the story, embellishing details, but always noting the undeniable calm, precision, and control of the woman who had silenced 3 men without raising a fist. Students at the Veterans Center would carry the lesson forward, applying it in their own lives, sharing it with friends, families, and colleagues. The ripple effect of one demonstration of mastery extended far beyond the immediate confrontation. And Sarah, walking along the beach at twilight, understood the final truth of the day. ASEA Lulz training never truly ends. The battlefield may change, the enemies may be different, but the principles, vigilance, precision, discipline, and awareness remain eternal. Her presence alone, silent yet commanding, could teach lessons that brute force never could. As she gazed at the horizon, the sun dipping into the Pacific, she whispered softly to herself, almost as a reminder, respect is earned, control is demonstrated, and every action matters. The world outside the battlefield would never fully comprehend the life she had led, the missions, the sacrifice, the precision under pressure. But the lesson she delivered that day was universal. Underestimate a trained warrior at your own peril. Humility, awareness, and respect were not just social niceties. They were survival tools, and Sarah Donovan had just reminded the world why. Even in civilian life, her presence carried weight. Even in quiet moments, her training guided her. And for those who challenged her, the memory would linger. A lesson etched not in violence, but in precision, calm, and the unyielding authority of someone who had survived the extremes and emerged unbroken. The Pacific Ocean stretched before Sarah Donovan, a vast expanse of blue that mirrored the endless discipline and focus she carried inside her. It was early morning, the sun barely cresting the horizon, casting golden streaks across the waves. She stood at the edge of the pier, watching the water ripple in rhythmic patterns, as if whispering reminders of lessons learned long ago. Here, away from the chaos of the bar, the streets, and even the battlefield, she reflected on a life defined by rigor, precision, and survival. The events of the past week, the bar incident, the lessons for her students, the quiet demonstration of control, had crystallized something she had always known. Being a Navy SEAL wasn't about brute force or aggression. It was about vigilance, restraint, and the mastery of oneself in the most extreme circumstances. She had faced bullets, explosives, and hostile ambushes. Yet the most enduring challenges sometimes came quietly, in places where others underestimated her entirely. Her phone buzzed with messages from her students. They recounted how the men from the bar had spread the story of the encounter, their tone equal parts awe and disbelief. Sarah smiled faintly. This was more than legend. It was a living lesson in respect, discipline, and awareness. She had taught them, not through lectures alone, but through action, demonstrating that mastery isn't flaunted, it's lived. Yet even with these victories, Sarah knew her mission wasn't over. A SEAL's code wasn't confined to the battlefield. It was about integrity, vigilance, and leadership wherever life placed you. The principles she had lived by, courage, precision, discipline, and accountability guided her daily actions. Whether mentoring students, walking through a bar, or facing combat, she carried the same ethos. As she gazed out at the waves, memories of deployments flooded her mind. Desert missions, firefights, sniper operations, and countless hours of training all had taught her the value of control under pressure. She remembered one mission in particular, years ago, in which she had led a team through a hostile valley at night. Every footstep had been measured, every breath calculated. One misstep could have cost lives. And yet, in that chaos, her team had survived, not because of luck, but because of discipline and mutual trust. That same discipline now resonated in civilian moments, subtle, quiet, but no less powerful. She turned to see her students approaching the pier. They walked with respect, giving her space yet drawn to her presence. Over time, she had become more than a teacher. She was a mentor, a guide, and for many, a living example of what discipline and resilience could achieve. She greeted them with a nod, their silence a testament to the lessons she had imparted. "Lieutenant Commander," one began, "we've been talking about what happened last week." About the bar. His voice was careful, measured. He wasn't boasting or exaggerating. He was processing what he had witnessed. No one could have done what you did, and not hurt anyone. "How do you stay so calm?" Sarah paused, looking out at the horizon. Calm wasn't the absence of fear or chaos. It was the mastery of it. "Control comes from preparation," she said finally. "Every motion, every reaction, every decision must be deliberate. You anticipate before it happens, you act only when necessary, and you never let impulse override judgment. Strength without control is danger, to yourself and others. Control is what makes you lethal, and human at the same time." Her students listened intently, absorbing not only the words, but the weight behind them. She had faced more threats than most could imagine, yet her authority wasn't enforced through intimidation. It was earned through mastery of skill, discipline, and unflinching presence. After a long pause, she continued, "People underestimate what they don't see. They assume weakness, ignorance, or fear. But if you understand yourself, if you master your reactions, you become untouchable in ways most will never grasp. That's the lesson you must carry forward. Not to intimidate, not to dominate, but to live fully in awareness, to protect, and to respect life." The students nodded solemnly. They realized that the lesson extended far beyond the bar, beyond training rooms, and even beyond battlefields. It was a philosophy, a code, a way of life. Sarah Donovan had taught it through action, not just words, and its impact would ripple outward. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah prepared to leave the pier. She checked her equipment lightly, a habit ingrained over years of fieldwork. Even here, the lessons of vigilance persisted. Danger was unpredictable, but preparedness was predictable. Strength could be measured not by aggression, but by readiness, composure, and the ability to respond with precision. She walked back toward the city, the waves lapping rhythmically behind her, feeling the quiet satisfaction of someone who had lived the extremes and emerged intact. Her career as a Navy SEAL had forged her into a warrior, capable of facing unimaginable threats. Her return to civilian life had tested her in ways no battlefield ever could, reminding her that mastery was not only physical, but psychological, emotional, and moral. The story of the bar, the shove, and the controlled response had become more than an anecdote. It was a living example of the SEAL Code: discipline, awareness, and action grounded in integrity. Sarah Donovan had shown that skill, when applied with thought and precision, was a force far more powerful than brute aggression. The lesson was simple but profound. Respect must be earned, control must be maintained, and mastery is silent yet undeniable. Later that day, as she sat quietly in her apartment, overlooking the city, Sarah reflected on her journey. From the small town in Ohio, through grueling SEAL training, to the deserts of Kandahar, and now into the seemingly mundane challenges of civilian life, one truth remained constant: preparation, discipline, and mastery are universal. They are as relevant in a barroom confrontation as they are in firefights across the world. The trident tattoo on her forearm caught the light from the window, a symbol of accomplishment, discipline, and responsibility. It was not just an emblem of past missions, but a reminder of a code she lived by every day. For Sarah Donovan, the SEAL's code was no longer confined to military operations. It was a guiding principle in all aspects of life: vigilance in thought, precision in action, and unwavering integrity in every interaction. Her students, her colleagues, and even those who had once challenged her carried fragments of her lessons forward. The ripple effect of discipline, calm, and respect extended beyond her immediate influence, touching lives in ways she could scarcely measure. As twilight descended, painting the sky in streaks of purple and gold, Sarah walked along the edge of the pier once more. The ocean mirrored the expanse of possibilities in her life, vast, deep, and filled with unseen challenges. Yet she walked with certainty, calm, and readiness, a living testament to the lessons of the SEAL Code: respect, discipline, precision, and presence. In the end, it wasn't the shove, the bar, or the confrontation that defined her legacy. It was the quiet mastery of self and circumstance, the knowledge that one could face chaos, fear, and uncertainty with composure and integrity. That a single person, disciplined and aware, could teach lessons far beyond what any words alone could convey. Sarah Donovan, Navy SEAL, warrior, mentor, and teacher, had proven one immutable truth: the strength of a warrior lies not just in skill, but in control. In every glance, every movement, and every decision, she lived that code. And for those who ever doubted, disrespected, or underestimated her, the lesson had already been delivered, silently, decisively, and permanently. The waves whispered against the shore as night fell. Sarah Donovan turned from the pier, stepping into the world with the calm certainty of someone who had faced the extremes and emerged intact. She was ready for whatever came next, a warrior defined not by conflict alone, but by the code she carried, lived, and embodied every day.